Celtics Lab is brought to you by FanDuel, the exclusive wagering partner of the CLNS Media Network.
Welcome into another post-Game 7 victory edition of the Boston Celtics podcast, Celtics Lab. I am so excited, I can't even remember the name of my own podcast. I'm here, co-host Alex Goldberg. We will hopefully be joined by some people trying to figure out exactly what fueled that historic performance by Jayson Tatum. Alex.
Whew, man, happy Mother's Day.
Indeed.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously the headline of the story today is that Jayson Tatum erupted for 51 points and just slaughtered the Sixers at basically every level throughout Game 7. It's just... At the end of the day, Justin, basketball is not an immensely complicated game for all that we make it out to be. There's a lot of stats and analytics and, cool things that we as fans can kind of latch on to and pick apart and get into kind of really micro nuanced territory. But at the end of the day, basketball, and particularly playoff basketball, is about having the best guy on the floor. And if you have the best guy on the floor, you're going to win. And Jayson Tatum was astonishingly the best guy on the floor today. It was not close. He was in complete control of this game. Even in the beginning phase of the game where the process was a little ragged for Boston, it was clear that Tatum was coming in with an agenda. I guess that's where we should start in that first quarter. But my initial takeaway is, wow, holy hell, Jayson Tatum is an incredible basketball player, and we are very, very lucky to have him on this team.
This episode of the Celtics Lab podcast is brought to you by FanDuel, the exclusive wagering partner of the CLNS Media Network and BetterHelp. You deserve to be happy. You probably don't need therapy at this particular moment. It might be good for any of our friends who happen to be Philadelphia 76ers fans to check out BetterHelp, just to help cope with that very expected collapse. If we're talking about two of the people on that team, kind of the coaching staff, we can get that just a second. And I bet most of us did not have Tatum going off for a historic, as in the most points anyone in the history of the NBA has ever scored in a Game 7. We just witnessed that tonight.
Yeah, it's crazy to think that Jayson Tatum is, still kind of getting better as a player and is already in historic territory. The Celtics team has been maddeningly inconsistent at times. But throughout all of that, the one thing that has been consistent for the Celtics this season, for the most part, is that when games matter, Jayson Tatum shows up in a big way. And tonight was no exception. Obviously, a lot of momentum carrying in from when he saved the Celtics season in Game 6 on the road in Philly. But starting off in the kind of first quarter of the game, just kind of walking through it, I think one of the things that stood out to me, just like at the very beginning of the phases of the game, is that the Celtics offense was not looking super crisp. They were turning over the ball, and they were, kind of doing the usual process things that they struggle with. They were not getting great looks, taking too long to get into their offense, generally looking a little dicey. But Jayson Tatum was scoring. He was getting to the rim. He was getting to the free throw line. He was getting in a good rhythm. And even though the rest of the team was not really activated at that point, it was clear that Tatum was showing up ready to play this game. But the thing that really stood out to me in that first quarter was that the Celtics were just locked defensively from opening tip. So Al Horford, I think, is the first shout out that we have to get to. We'll get to Jayson Tatum and all the things that he's done throughout the pod. But as far as guys who maybe do not get the headline, Al Horford had an absolutely terrific game tonight. He locked up Joel Embiid, consistently made life difficult for him at the elbows. He did a nice job of hedging and recovering to try and blow up that Harden Embiid pick and roll, which has really been the staple of the Sixers offense. And in general, Al Horford he's a solid veteran player. He knows how to step up in big moments. Tonight was no exception. He had a terrific game, set the tone defensively, and I think from there the Celtics just kind of went off to the races.
Yeah, a couple of things really stood out in the first half. My notes definitely look like a game that the Celtics are going to lose in the first half. Lots of complaining on my part for the lack of ball movement, for the very few three-pointers taken. And that three-pointer deficit, at first it seemed like it was a bug, but as the game progressed, it increasingly started to look like it might be a feature, particularly once Jayson Tatum started hitting some three-pointers in the pick and roll. The pick and roll seemed to be the primary offensive weapon that the Celtics leaned on, maybe because Tatum started getting hot early, maybe because that was the plan all along. If it was, that was a real boss move by Joe Mazzulla. What are your thoughts on this funky offense that we saw that really handed this historic performance to us?
I have two thoughts. The first is that it is somewhat a byproduct of starting two bigs. Having Robert Williams and Al Horford on the floor allows the Celtics to operate in a little more of a pick and roll heavy offense as opposed to a pace and space offense with Al Horford and kind of five out. I think in general, they tried to use Robert Williams to kind of occupy that dunker spot area and then have Al Horford and Marcus Smart kind of set picks for Jayson Tatum to get going towards the rim with a chance to either score or hit Rob for lobs or hit the corners for threes. It seemed like they kind of went back to that more so than anything because of the defensive alignment for the Celtics and how they were trying to kind of play bigger and use their size to their advantage. Another thing that stood out to me is that they were in particular really targeting Embiid specifically. Tatum kind of made a point, really more so in the second half, but throughout the game of like trying to get Embiid into that pick and roll dance, bring him out high, take him away from the rim. You know, Embiid has been such a good rim protector, both this series and really the entire playoffs. I think from a process standpoint, it makes a lot of sense as to why you want to try and pull him away from the rim. And the Celtics did that to great effect. But, you know, again, for me, Justin, it has to start on the defensive end. And I think that the Celtics, what stood out to me is that their offensive pace kind of more closely matched their defense and what they were trying to do there, where the defense was trying to kind of keep the game at a certain speed. They weren't really flying up and down the court in the way that they have been in previous games and this matchup. They really tried more so to kind of keep a steady diet of pick and roll, to keep a half court game going and kind of beat the Sixers at their own game. And they did so to great effect.
They did a really good job with throwing all kinds of different looks at Embiid as well. He was never comfortable. The ball got poked out of his hands on at least 4 occasions. I can remember, maybe more than that. They did a really, really good job with him while also really shutting down the perimeter. I think they held the 76ers to just over 31% from the perimeter in the first half of the game, which is crazily not even when they really started to stick it to them. Thoughts on how they handled the three-headed snake that is Maxey, James Harden, and Embiid?
So they did a nice job of keying in on Embiid and making things hard for him. But, you know, honestly, I think the Celtics defense was good in this game. I don't think it was great. I think that it was more so a byproduct of what has become a pretty familiar refrain for this time of year. James Harden was a ghost in this game. He was completely absent. And it was really the case from the first quarter onward. You know, one of the things that I was of course, with my family doing Mother's Day things as we were watching the game. And I was doing my best to talk my mom through what was happening on the court. And one of the things that I pointed out to her was that James Harden was just like not pushing the ball. He was not getting involved really in any meaningful sense. There were a number of times in the first quarter where James Harden beat his man and had an open lane to the basket. And instead, it's kick out to PJ Tucker for a corner three, kick out to Tobias Harris above the break, drive into traffic and try and find somebody else. James Harden really was going out of his way to be a facilitator in that first quarter. And like, I get it, on some degree, you want to have players who are unselfish. You want to have players who can set other guys up. And particularly in a closeout game, that's understandable. But listen, man, you are getting paid presumably max contract money this offseason or expecting to do so. If you want that money, you need to score in game sevens. And James Harden is a generational scorer, won an MVP. He's by all accounts going to go down with numerous records and being remembered as one of the most gifted offensive players that this game has ever seen. So to see him just melt down again in critical moments in the playoffs, to be completely gun shy, not looking for a shot on any level, particularly when the Sixers have at their best mostly been a James Harden-centric team this year. I mean, the best version of the Sixers that we saw in this series was one where Harden was leading the dance and Embiid was the secondary attacker that was kind of coming in after Harden had already softened up the defense. James Harden was completely absent from today's proceedings. And I think that is ultimately what killed the Sixers as much as anything. Like, you can't have that kind of a performance from one of your two best players. He had 0 points in the fourth quarter of this game. He just was completely absent from opening tip. He ended with 9 points total. Like, that's pretty unacceptable if you're trying to have this guy be a foundational piece.
Another thing I wanted to talk about involves Harden. To an extent, we also saw some similar manifestations taking the form of double technicals when Jaylen Brown found himself being grabbed by, I think it was Niang, off the Philly bench. How are we thinking about the officiating in this game with the Harden shiv to, again, Jalen's face, and just the general atmosphere given Woj's, shall we say, interesting comments ahead of the game?
So obviously Scott Foster was the lead official tonight, and I think it's Eric Lewis, is that right? Was also in this game, and there's much consternation about how Eric Lewis has a really great record when the Celtics have a really great record when Eric Lewis is reffing. Scott Foster, there's plenty of baggage there. Overall, there were definitely some questionable calls, I think, in this game, both for and against Boston. And in general, you hate to see that kind of in a playoff game in particular. But at the end of the day, the officiating was not the determinant factor in the outcome of this game. The determinant factor was that James Harden completely disappeared. Joel Embiid had a really hard time against Al Horford, and Jayson Tatum just ripped Philly's throat out in the third quarter and onward.
Yeah, in fact, I actually went as far as to comment during the game that this game, how the Celtics played, is exactly how you should play if you feel that the refs are being a little bit questionable towards you. Put it on the court and make that be your answer, and boy, did they.
Yeah, seriously. So I have a couple of shout outs that I think we want to get into. Obviously, one of them is, the big one is Jayson Tatum, 51. Historic performance. I mean, what more can you ask for from your superstar? Where James Harden was absent, Jayson Tatum was very much fully present. He was phenomenal from opening tip. He completely controlled the pace of the game. And he got into this flow state where the shots that he's taking, I think a number of the shots that he took towards the kind of middle to end of the game were objectively not great looks, like contested fadeaways, step backs, things of that nature, things that you think, the process on this really isn't good. But at the end of the day, Jayson Tatum is one of the 10 best basketball players on earth. And you have to give him those shots, and you have to make those shots something that you're focusing on, because when he hits them, it's backbreaking for the opponent and for really anybody else. He came in with an agenda. He was not going to let them lose this game. And the result is a historic performance that will likely put him in the pantheon of Celtics greats to come. That's my first shout out. Al Horford, again, just staunch defensive effort. He started hitting threes as well. I believe he had 2 of them. Never wavered from that. He never lost confidence, which is just typical of a sound, solid veteran leader that he's become. He was terrific, and he, completely locked up Joel Embiid, made life incredibly difficult on him. Other shout outs, Jaylen Brown. I think Jaylen Brown had a couple of shots that were not particularly great and a couple of bad turnovers. He also took a little bit of a physical beating in this game, just getting knocked around a little bit. Obviously, James Harden smacking him in the face didn't help. And neither did George Niang grabbing his knee, but he was terrific. He had 25 points. He was efficient. Whenever the Celtics needed somebody other than Jayson Tatum to score, Jaylen Brown was there, ready to roll. Just exactly what you want from a number two option. And the result is he and Jayson Tatum combined for 76 points combined, which is wild. Two players putting up 76 in a game 7 scenario that is crazy.
I think they almost doubled up. Not doubled up. I think what they had a lead over Embiid and Harden almost as much as they scored.
Yeah, I mean, remarkable performance. Other shout outs that I think we need to really key in on this one. Joe Mazzulla has been superb for the past 2 games. The adjustments that he made, starting Robert Williams, changing the coverages on defense, making sure to take away the Sixers' bread and butter kind of pocket pass, pick and roll from Harden and Embiid, slimming down the rotation to 7 guys, reorienting the offense around a pick and roll set specifically to get Jayson Tatum going. Like every single question that Joe Mazzulla that we had about Joe Mazzulla after game 5, he pretty much answered in these past 2 games. And, it's been an up and down season for Joe Mazzulla. He's had some decisions that have backfired. He's had some questionable choices here and there, but I've been pretty steadfast on this. That guy is a good coach. And, if we are going to be okay with slamming Joe Mazzulla when he messes up, then we have to be okay with praising him when he succeeds. And these past 2 games, he did a terrific job getting this team ready to play. Marcus Smart, a typical Marcus Smart performance, not particularly like exploding off the stat sheet, but clearly his presence was felt in this game. He was tagging Embiid on rolls. He was messing things up in their pick and roll dance and just like getting in the way, stealing the ball, hitting timely shots, setting the offense up well. It's all the little things with Marcus Smart. And when he's at his best, that's the kind of player he is. In particular, getting into Marcus Smart as a screener, I think paid a lot of dividends for Boston. Robert Williams was also terrific. I think after having an up and down first half, he really got it rolling as the dunker spot guy, catching lobs, providing rim pressure, and just generally being in the way. I think it was a full team effort, even if Jayson Tatum gets the glory of the 51 points. Everybody contributed to this win, and it was pretty cool to watch.
Now, if I was looking for a place to, bet on a historic performance from Jayson Tatum tonight, what would be a good place?
Well, Justin, if you were looking to bet, the place that you want to go is FanDuel. Make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs, because right now, new customers can get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Some of the greatest things about FanDuel: it's safe, it's secure, you can get paid instantly, and there are great promotions. In general, you can look at all sorts of different odds, different lines, and those promotions you can win, and you can win repeatedly. There is no better place to bet all of the playoff action than America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/Boston and get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's FanDuel.com/Boston. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. 21 plus in select states. First online real money wager only. $10 deposit required. Refund issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire in 14 days. Restrictions apply. See full terms at FanDuel.com/sportsbook. FanDuel is offering online sports wagering in Kansas under an agreement with Kansas Star LLC. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit FanDuel.com/RG. For Colorado, Iowa, Michigan, New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Tennessee, and Virginia, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342 for Arizona, 1-888-789-7777, or visit ccpg.org/chat for Connecticut, 1-800-9-WITH-IT for Indiana, 1-800-522-4700, or visit ksgamblinghelp.com for Kansas. Call 1-877-770-STOP in LA, gamblinghelplinema.org, or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts. Visit www.mdgamblinghelp.org in Maryland, 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 for New York, 1-800-522-4700 in Wyoming, or visit www.1800gambler.net for West Virginia.
So speaking of bets, we are looking at the same four teams now as a result of this win as in the 2020 COVID bubble that took place in Orlando at Walt Disney World's properties. Thoughts on facing the Miami Heat?
Man,
Too soon?
another round of hell in a cell against Jimmy Butler and Eric Spoelstra. Here's the thing. So we can't sleep on the Miami Heat. The Miami Heat are extremely well coached. They have a lot of experienced veteran players. Jimmy Butler has been out of his mind for the entire playoffs, as he seems to do every time this time of year when he's in the playoffs. They have also made some smart adjustments. Kyle Lowry coming off the bench has worked really well for them in that series against the Knicks. Kevin Love adds a dimension of spacing and size to this Miami team that they really did not have prior to acquiring him. Duncan Robinson has been dusted off and is now back in Miami shooting at a high percentage. He's playing meaningful minutes. Gabe Vincent has been playing really well as the starting point guard. In general, this Miami Heat team is better than they were for basically all of the regular season. They kind of limped into the playoffs. They were very beat up, but they're rolling right now, and the Celtics cannot afford to sleep on them. A couple of things that are going the Celtics' way in this matchup that were not last year. The Celtics are a good deal healthier heading into this matchup than they were in the previous season. Now, obviously, Miami is super physical. That is their defining trait as a team. So I would expect that the Celtics will not come out of this series completely unsaved. God willing, they do, but it's going to be a physical and demanding series. They will also have home court in this series, which they did not have last year, and they very much. It was a slog. Let's be real. They had an absolute war in the conference finals against Miami last year, and I would expect nothing less against this Miami team. I think they're coming to play. They completely believe in themselves. They are playing with so much confidence right now. This is going to be a challenging matchup in a lot of respects. That being said, there are a couple of advantages that Boston, I think, can go to. Malcolm Brogdon is the player that Brad Stevens, kind of brought into this offseason thinking this would be the guy to put them over the top. And I think one of the reasons that he specifically zoned in on Brogdon is because Brogdon is the perfect player to counter a lot of Miami's defensive actions. He's able to get the ball on the floor, score with confidence, set up other guys. That is exactly who you need in a series against Miami. So I'm expecting big stuff from him. For me, there are a couple of key questions. The first is, how is Al Horford going to manage this series? Because he has had a pretty hefty workload in this playoff so far. Bam Adebayo is a tough matchup in a variety of respects. And I think, Kevin Love, Miami has real and meaningful size. This is going to be another tough series for Boston's bigs. So how are they going to manage that? Similarly, is Kevin Love's spacing going to make it challenging for Joe Mazzulla to play the double big lineup? I'm hoping that the answer to that is no, that they can kind of have Al Horford just space out as a primary defender and continue to have Robert Williams, rove off of whoever they want shooting the ball. But Miami has more shooting than Philly on the floor and will have more shooting than Philly on the floor. Defensively, the Celtics will have some opportunities to attack that they did not against Philly. Bam Adebayo is a very good player. He is not the rim protector that Joel Embiid is. Duncan Robinson, Kevin Love, those guys are targets, and Boston can hunt them pretty relentlessly. But as always, the number one thing that Boston needs to do is find a way to contain Jimmy Butler, who has been, again, just out of his mind, incredible for this entire playoffs. They're going to need to have multiple bodies to throw at him. They're going to need to be able to play with pace and wear him down. And they're going to need to be prepared for some of these games where he's going to have some monster performances in this series. I expect nothing less. So a lot to watch. It's a fascinating matchup. It's a familiar matchup in some ways, but a different one in a lot of other ways. Oh man, and it's going to be stressful because I truly believe that Eric Spoelstra is far and away the best coach in the NBA right now, and he's going to be cooking up a storm. Joe Mazzulla, I think, has done a really good job for the most part. This is easily his toughest test yet, and I will be very interested to see how the Celtics respond.
So, in my mind, the obvious X factor for the Miami Heat in this situation is clearly Spoelstra and his coaching. Jimmy at this point is a known factor. You just have to assume that you're going to be getting like 60% of what we saw from Jayson Tatum on a night-to-night basis in this series. Going back the other direction, who, besides the Jays in this series would be, in your opinion, an X factor for the Celtics in this?
So I already listed Malcolm Brogdon, and I think that's a big one. In particular, he's going to have to not only manage that bench unit and the bench scoring, but he's going to have to be able to handle Kyle Lowry and all of the physicality that he brings as a backup point guard. I think Lowry coming off the bench has been one of the biggest reasons that Miami has turned their season around and gotten all the way to the conference finals. He's playing outstanding basketball right now. So Brogdon for me is a critical factor. Obviously, Robert Williams, it adds a completely different dimension to the Celtics team when he's healthy and rolling. I think one of the big things that Boston struggled with in last year's series is that Robert Williams was compromised physically, and Miami knew that and targeted him pretty aggressively when he was on the floor. There were a lot of situations where they were trying to bring Robert Williams into the screening action, try and get him matched up with a faster perimeter player outside and take him out of what he does best, which is patrol the restricted area and block shots and get rebounds. His health will be critical in this and his ability to stay on the floor. The other guy that I'm looking at is Marcus Smart. Marcus Smart has had, I think, some up and down playoffs where the best games he's been spectacular and arguably won the Celtics a couple of games. But he's also taking a beating in a lot of these series. He's been physically dinged up since kind of midway through the Atlanta series. And Marcus is a tough guy. Like, that dude can take just about anything. But this Miami team is so physical and so difficult to cover. And if you don't think Jimmy Butler is going to be coming at Marcus Smart with his shoulders and his elbows and every single thing to try and, take him off of his rhythm, that is a wrong-headed assessment. So for me, Marcus needs to stay healthy, and he needs to be able to be effective in his role as a setup man. I think Miami is going to throw as many interesting coverages at Jayson Tatum as they possibly can. Their number one goal is going to be take Jayson Tatum out of rhythm. That's what it was last year. And, they've done that. They have a track record of being able to do that. Can Marcus Smart, as the lead point guard, find ways to get Jayson Tatum going in particular is a huge storyline for me this series.
I don't disagree. Another thing that I'm thinking about with this series too is, will we see any changes in who actually gets on the floor? Because for this series, at least, it's just a 7-man rotation. Nobody really got any meaningful minutes beyond the starters besides Brogdon and White. Do you see anybody who hasn't been playing in this series who might make an appearance in next?
I'm keeping my eye on Grant Williams and Sam Hauser. I think both of those guys have gotten some spot minutes in the playoffs with kind of varying effectiveness. I think there's going to be opportunities for Sam Hauser to play this series, particularly if the Heat are playing Duncan Robinson a lot, which I think in some ways they kind of have to. Sam Hauser is in a lot of ways a similar player to Duncan Robinson. They are both kind of longer than you expect forwards. They can hit the outside shot at a high level. They have questions defensively. Obviously, Joe Mazzulla, did not like what he saw from Sam Hauser in games 1 and 2 against Philly, and he basically didn't show up outside of garbage time. So I think that's a guy I'm looking at for if he can get some opportunities in this series against some of Miami's, maybe less impactful defensive players. And then Grant Williams, I think they're going to need at least a few games where Grant Williams is actually able to contribute meaningful minutes, just because I would anticipate with all of the intelligence and guile and physicality that Miami has to bring, the bigs are going to get in some foul trouble. I would bet good money on that. And I think
How needs rest too. I mean,
And Al does need a little bit of rest. I think Grant Williams is going to have to be able to come in and contribute, at least on some level. And, Joe Mazzulla, I think slimming down the rotation for the last couple of games was absolutely the right call. In game 6 and 7 scenarios, you need to 100% trust the guys that you're playing to do their jobs at a high level, and small mistakes can kill you. But in the earlier games, that's where I think you want to try and get a little bit of rest, a little bit of breathing room for Al in particular. That's where I am interested to see whether Hauser and Grant Williams can contribute in this series.
well, it probably shouldn't be, but I have to say that just advancing back to the conference finals, not only does it, move the season out of disaster territory should they fall. We don't want them to lose in the Eastern, conference finals, obviously, but it's a heck of a lot better than going down in the second round.
Yep.
How are we feeling in terms of our mental health?
Well, I'm feeling pretty good about my mental health right now, but if you're not feeling great about your mental health, then there's a couple of things you can do. And one of the things that you can do is you can go to our friends at BetterHelp. So BetterHelp is an online therapy service. It helps a lot with all sorts of, if you have anything to kind of look at for your mental health, to kind of develop your own practice and to kind of do so in a way that is sustainable and thoughtful and not necessarily reliant on, I don't know, whether your basketball team wins or loses, then BetterHelp is a really great place to get started. And, it's really easy to get caught up in what everybody else kind of needs from you in the world today, and to not think about what you need from yourself. BetterHelp is there to help you manage that process. When we spend all of our time giving to other people or, trying to be our best selves for, everything else that we have to do, it can leave you feeling thin, stretched out, burned out. And BetterHelp can help you there with online, reliable therapy. And it can give you the tools to find a little bit more balance in your life. In particular, it's online, it's, easy to access. You can kind of go through all sorts of different options, find somebody that works for you. BetterHelp is a really great program in a lot of ways, particularly if you're just getting started with therapy and it's something that you kind of don't have a lot of comfort with. BetterHelp is a great place to jump in.
Very cool. Sorry, I muted myself there. Speaking of things that would have messed with my mental health, the opportunity not to face the Los Angeles Lakers in the NBA Finals would have put a very, very tiny thing in it, because unlike a lot of people, I do want to see the Lakers do well, because I love to see the Celtics and the Lakers in the finals, right? This is actually realistically a possibility in a way that I think a lot of us didn't really take seriously before they beat the Golden State Warriors 3 games to, I think it was 3? 4 games to 3. What are your thoughts on this particular series?
So the Lakers won 4 games to 2, just want to clarify that. But so they will be facing the number 1 seeded Denver Nuggets, who have up to this point, I think, been pretty clearly the best team in the playoffs. Nikola Jokic is magnificent and has been magnificent for 2 series in a row, completely dominating his opponents. And in general, this Denver Nuggets team is rolling right now. Jamal Murray has really reestablished himself as a top flight creator and scorer. Michael Porter Jr. is really evolving, not just as a shooter, but as a cutter in particular. He's doing a really nice job getting involved in a bunch of different ways and becoming a more dynamic player in general. Aaron Gordon and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and Bruce Brown have taken what was a pretty moribund Denver defense and turned it into a genuinely menacing one. Their perimeter defense is operating at a really high level. And in general, I think the Nuggets are pretty clearly established at this point as the most consistent game-to-game team in the playoffs. So this is going to be a real challenge for the Lakers. That being said, if I'm a Lakers fan, one thing I'm looking at with some optimism is that LeBron James is back. He had an superb closeout game in LA against the Warriors last night, or I guess it was the night before. But he looked all the way back. He was, making great floor reads, scoring pretty much at will. In general, he just seems very much physically in a much stronger place. Now, obviously, the playoffs are a grind. LeBron has a lot of miles on his body, and I guess he's still nursing a foot injury, but you wouldn't have noticed it if you had watched that game 6. He's been terrific. And Anthony Davis is the real story for the Lakers. He has been playing, I would say, maybe the best basketball of his career, all things being equal. As a rim protector, he's never looked better. He's putting up monster rebounding stat lines and is in general impacting the game at a super high level. This Lakers roster is really well built. We have to give Rob Pelinka some credit. They really nailed that.
Weird to say that, man.
It does, but they nailed that trade deadline. They have a lot of guys on this team who can contribute. The emergence of Austin Reeves has been pretty significant. D'Angelo Russell looks comfortable as their third option. Dennis Schroeder, I think, has been playing really well, both as a starter and as a bench piece, and it's nice to have that flexibility. They have guys who can hurt you. They have Jared Vanderbilt, who's emerging as a quality defender. I think this is going to be a really, really good series. And I very easily could see it going to 7 games. I would give the slight edge to Denver because of home court and just how good Jokic has been. But there's definitely a world where the Lakers win this, and we could be talking about the greatest matchup in NBA history, yet another chapter in a few weeks from now.
With the absurdity of both teams going for NBA record 18th banner at that, I'm just going to try to shelve thinking about that too much because I don't want my enthusiasm to rub off on the Celtics, because we know what happens when they think they're going to be in a series they haven't gotten to yet.
The Heat are the real deal. We cannot take that for granted. They are a serious basketball team, and they're going to make everything they can to make life difficult for Boston.
We should probably talk about the losers of the two West semifinal series, the Phoenix Suns and the Golden State Warriors, and what is going to be happening in their future. Let's start with the Phoenix Suns. They fired their head coach, Monty Williams. I have my eye on him as a potential Boston assistant if he doesn't pick up a job immediately. He and Paul Silas's son, Steven, I think, are two of the more interesting names out there. Silas being affiliated with Boston through a visit, as well as his historic ties through his dad. Any thoughts on what's going on with the Suns?
Man, so the Suns went all in this year for Kevin Durant. They traded Mikal Bridges, they traded Cam Johnson, they traded a whole boatload of first-round picks, and they ended up in pretty much the same spot that they were last year. They have a lot of questions about their roster, and obviously who is going to be their head coach is very much up in the air. It's a really interesting offseason for the Suns. I am personally of the opinion that if you're able to get Kevin Durant for 2 players who might make all-star teams, maybe, and that's big if, you have to do it. So I don't hate that trade for Phoenix by any means, but it does change what their team looks like going forward, and it really radically accelerates their timeline because Kevin Durant is 34. DeAndre Ayton does not seem happy. Second year in a row that he does not seem super thrilled about being on the Phoenix Suns. He has a big contract, and I think there are some questions about what his role is going to be. I guess my question is, was the firing of Monty Williams in part motivated by internal dissension between him and DeAndre Ayton about their role? If that's the case, and the Suns plan on keeping DeAndre Ayton, then their offseason gets a little bit less complicated and a little bit more difficult in some ways, because they are capped out and do not have picks to trade. So retooling this roster substantially becomes a difficult proposition without trading a big piece like DeAndre Ayton. If you do trade DeAndre Ayton, I think that opens up a lot of flexibility for what their roster could be. I think it's pretty fair to say that Durant and Devin Booker are not going anywhere. Those guys are locked into the Phoenix Suns core for the foreseeable future. You also have Chris Paul, who
I was just going to ask what you think happens with him.
I think a lot of smoke around the idea that Chris Paul has probably played his last game in a Phoenix Suns uniform. Chris Paul is an all-time great player. He will be remembered as a Hall of Famer. He is pretty clearly in the twilight of his career now. He cannot stay healthy at a reasonable rate for a team that's trying to win a title right now. I would not be shocked at all if they move on from Chris Paul this offseason. The question to me is, are they going to try and package Ayton and Chris Paul together to get a third star player for that team? Because I feel like that's their main path to contention. It strikes me as a difficult proposition to trade Paul and Ayton for depth pieces. I just feel like there's not a whole lot of clean and effective ways to do that. Who would bite on that as a potential star trade package? I don't know. I'm kind of not sure.
I can kind of think of another team that wouldn't be the worst option, considering they held on to a two timeline approach that really cost them. And this is, of course, the other team that I wanted to talk about, the Golden State Warriors.
Yeah,
they really screwed up, I think, at the trade deadline by not consolidating some of that younger talent. And while it's not the greatest younger talent, if you're dealing with an organization in a similar boat as you, and the main thing is that both of you kind of need the parts the other has, I think that might not be the worst move. But like, what do you think is coming for the Golden State Warriors?
it's so hard because I really don't think that, like, Steph Curry is going to be a Golden State Warrior for the rest of his career. I don't think there's any debating that. Unless he specifically says, I want out, there's just no way that he's going to be like dealt or move on. I just don't see it happening. So in terms of like the other guys that you can move, it's true, you can do a young pieces consolidation trade, and maybe, if you send out like a Jonathan Kuminga and, a Moses Moody and a bunch of other stuff for a player like DeAndre Ayton, that could be the kind of trade that you're looking for. I don't really see how that would work for Golden State in particular, especially given how good Kevon Looney's been for them, specifically playing the role that he is playing. I also think there's something to the idea that the Warriors really found success above all else in continuity. And for as challenging as this stretch has been for the Warriors with trying to integrate younger players into their rotation and making that work, at the end of the day, the core three of Steph, Clay, and Draymond, they all had good seasons. And I think there's reasonable enough evidence to suggest that if you put those guys in a situation where they can win, they will deliver. They did deliver in the first round. They didn't have enough juice to beat this Lakers team. But I would be surprised if the Warriors change out any of their core three parts between Draymond, Clay, and Steph. There's a lot of talk about what will Draymond Green's extension look like? Will that be, enough to keep him in Golden State? I would be surprised if they don't work something out at this point. I just feel like everything that he's saying, everything that Steph Curry has been saying, my best guess is that Draymond Green is a Warrior this time next year. The question for me is, what happens more so to Andrew Wiggins, to Kevon Looney, to Jordan Poole, to those guys? There's definitely,
I think you need to package some of them with some of the younger guys. I think it might be worth hanging on to Moses Moody, but the rest of them, I'm not so
that's
sure.
that's
what is he giving you?
Yeah. And Kuminga, I think, wants out. I think he's looking for a bigger role, understandably so, but I think he's ready to do something different. I think the tough part with Jordan Poole is that Jordan Poole is on a very big contract, and a contract that I think a lot of teams would be a little bit gun shy about taking on.
I don't think there's any team in the league at this point that would not be gun shy about it. He only excels when he's in exactly the right position, and there isn't enough supporting cast with the team that he's on now to put him in that position. So he's going to be a mediocre player who's considerably overpaid until they can get him open constantly.
And it's going to be difficult because, Draymond Green, I think, has apologized a lot, and he's talked about this a lot, but I get the sense that there's still a little bit of bad blood between him and Jordan Poole, given, understandably, that Draymond Green punched Jordan Poole in the face. And typically it takes a little bit to repair the bond there. So to me, Jordan Poole seems like the obvious candidate for Golden State to try and package with some other guys to upgrade a little bit. But the question is, who's taking on Jordan Poole? Who wants to do that? Who wants to sign up for that? And what would they be getting back in return to make that work? And then you come up with the Wiggins question. I think Andrew Wiggins, had a weird season. He missed a lot of time with, some family stuff. And obviously there are things that are bigger than basketball. Andrew Wiggins, we hope that all is okay there. To me, Andrew Wiggins is still a good player that can very much contribute to a winning basketball team. Even with the contract that he's on, I think Andrew Wiggins could help a lot of teams. And I kind of wonder if, given Poole's relatively low value, would Andrew Wiggins would it make sense for Golden State to move Andrew Wiggins now while his value is pretty high, for, say, I don't know, a fourth true star level player that they could add into that starting five?
I don't think that's an unreasonable assumption at all. In fact, that's what I expect them to do. I do expect some significant moves as well. I just, like you, I think there's one more good title run left in this core three. So I do expect to see them back with the Warriors next season, though I don't expect that. We do have a couple other news things to talk about before we use the magic of editing to bring Cameron Tabatabai in to join us from his media availability, along with maybe a special guest. We'll see how that works out. Oh, you know what? Scratch that. He heard me talking about him. Here he comes now. We'll just bring him in now.
All right.
So while we wait for Cam to get his sea legs underneath him, we should mention that the Celtics have been working out guys in the second round fairly consistently. Hi, Cam. You are live with us. The targets that they are going after in these pre-draft workouts are guys who are projected fairly firmly in the second round, towards the latter half of it, guys that you probably only take with a promise, with the idea that you'd be developing them most likely. There's a couple guys that I thought were interesting and might be able to play pretty quickly. One interesting guy, I just did an article on him today, Taylor Funk of Utah State. He modeled his game on Larry Bird. He's nowhere near the player Larry Bird is, or he wouldn't be going in the second round, but he's very interesting for those reasons. Also, UConn fans are probably happy to hear that Andre Jackson of the title team interviewed with the Celtics, or worked out for the Celtics ahead of the draft. And then the other thing that we really need to talk about has nothing to do with the Boston Celtics in any way, shape, or form, other than it might make some of their West Coast games, well, not West Coast, but Western Conference games next season more, obviously, easy to deal with early in the season, based on what I'm hearing is going to be a lengthy suspension coming for one Ja Morant. Alex, any thoughts on that?
My thoughts are, Ja Morant, perhaps we should consider the not 96-hour rehab option in the future. Seems like things are not going super well for this guy. I hope he's able to figure it out, because Ja Morant is just such a fun basketball player to watch. But he's clearly going through some stuff right now, and I don't know what it is, but that guy needs some time off the court to get his life in order.
So, Cam, I know that you were mostly doing media availability, and we just kind of threw this in your lap, unbeknownst to you, but any immediate reactions to those lovely videos that Ja posted of himself and the reaction from the league?
I thought you were about to ask me about the second round of the draft, and I was like, Justin, I couldn't possibly care less. Yeah, there's nothing really smart to say that probably hasn't been said, other than I think the tact that the team and the league took is immediately painting him as a victim was not the right tact. He is not any more or less dumb than a lot of 24-year-olds, but he has a lot of money and a lot of visibility at stake here. So the stakes are just different. I hope a more obvious penalty with more obvious long-term penalties encourages him to change his behavior. Least of which, and this is pedantic and not really the takeaway, stop going on Instagram Live, dude. Are you out of your mind?
Delete the goddamn app at this point.
I do not think Ja Morant is the only player in the NBA that owns a firearm. No, let's put it that way. But he's the only one that people are talking about.
All right, can we talk about the Celtics?
Yes.
Let's talk about the Celtics. So, the mood, how was it?
The mood was great. Jalen had one of his, I would use the word funniest press conferences. He was cracking jokes. The mood was light. Joe Mazzulla was laser focused per usual. He said he's gonna have a glass of wine and watch game tape to celebrate the win. Tatum was reflective and humbly spoke at length to the media. So yeah, the mood was good from the players post game. The mood in the Garden was unbelievable, and I think that Jaylen and Jayson both were quick to kind of unprompted levy that praise for the fans that they really brought the heat. There were moments where I was like, wow, I don't know if I've ever been in a building this loud. And then it got louder. And maybe this is a sign of age, but like it sounded like the speakers in my brain had broken. It sounded like fried audio. So yeah, it was whatever the fans paid to get through the gate. Couldn't put a price on that. I mean, that was a world-class performance. And also, whoa, I mean, if this was the Sixers Lab podcast, we would be talking about an unbelievable choke job from the Philadelphia 76ers.
Yeah.
They scored 10 points in the third quarter. That's so bad, and a franchise record.
Yeah.
So before we get into the nuts and bolts of what you heard, let's talk about the game. We already spoke a little bit about it ahead of time, actually a lot of bit about it.
As
One
I
of
said,
the
you're talking about the
things,
second round of the draft. I'm sure you guys covered the
no,
game.
seriously. The big takeaway in terms of a tactical aspect, and we aren't really clear, and we were hoping you could provide some clarity on this, was whether the pick and roll that got started in the first half, but really, hit its full stride when Tatum went off, whether that was a product of Tatum getting hot or whether that was an actual thing they planned to do the whole time and it got Tatum hot.
No, it was clear that the attacking the rim was a point of emphasis. The pick and roll kind of came after. Mazzulla, as often as he does, didn't want to really hone in on Tatum's individual performance. He said a lot about, guys were setting him up. It was a team effort, and really anything that came to offensive success, he really brought it back to defense, saying that defense set up the offense, that the only reason the game was close. I mean, the Sixers had a 9-point lead at one point. I think that has gotten erased in the coverage, but there was a period in the second quarter I asked Joe Mazzulla about turnovers. The Celtics were coughing up a lot of turnovers, and he said, we just played defense, which doesn't make any sense, but like it sort of makes sense, I guess. So I did not ask about pick and roll. I asked about the turnovers, and I got an answer about defense. So I think that's where Mazzulla's mind was at. I think that it ultimately got to a point where the Celtics could do anything they wanted on offense. So the pick and roll might have just come from the players running it themselves. It certainly looked stark because we don't see a lot of it from the Celtics, or we see less of it than I think some of us would like to see. But I think Tatum created so much space on the floor that a pick and roll against a fine Sixers defense wouldn't ordinarily be the right read, but it worked fine here.
Any thoughts or comments from the players? I mean, who did you talk to, by the way? I mean, obviously Jaylen, obviously Joe, Jayson, clearly, but any comments and who said them about the officiating or other aspects of the game that we haven't talked about?
Jaylen was asked about the Niang leg grab, and he said, Niang's a good guy. I'm going to work out with him this summer. No love lost. And basically said, I think he wanted to slow me down or something, and I kind of had to stand there so someone would notice that this happened. Scott, and then this is paraphrasing, but as close to a quote as I can make it. Scott Foster comes over and gives me a tech before assessing what had happened. So I don't think Jaylen would get fined because he's right and the refs were
That's
wrong.
what happened. Literally, that is what happened. They cannot fine him for saying what happened.
Yeah.
They might try it.
He from there kind of, I think he heard himself be that brash, and so then he kind of spun his tires on the answer. But I was he was pretty clear that he didn't like that had happened. Mazzulla was asked about, can I talk about the Woj thing? Have we talked about that?
No, please, we barely did, just barely.
Okay, so Woj, listeners know what we're talking about at this point. Okay, so first of all, Doc Rivers was asked about it and took the bait pregame and like tripled down on it. So you might as well have read the text that he sent to Woj before the game. At that point, Mazzulla was asked about it post game and said, "I was aware of it, but it, didn't really matter." And he completely deflected. Joe Mazzulla is like a karate master with his blocks, so he didn't.
Jiu-jitsu, I think.
Jiu-jitsu was actually, yeah, that's funny. That's true. Maybe that's a funny narrative for a story someday. I could not believe it. I was so distracted and distraught by such journalistic malfeasance on the part of Woj. My guess is it went like this. Daryl Morey called and said, if you don't send this tweet, I'm going to go to Shams when I fire Doc tomorrow. And Woj said, great, what do you want me to write? Because that I've never seen someone with such a big bully pulpit just completely kiss someone's ass like that. You got to be Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz sucking up to Trump or something like that, because what in the world? And ABC had the game. It was an ABC employee. Disney Mickey Mouse is on Woj's checks, and he's still. God, I hope there aren't ESPN employees. You guys don't work for ESPN, do you? No, okay, good. I thought that was wacky. I don't know if you could tell.
Just a bit. I don't know what was going on there. I have suspicions as well, but who knows how the sausages actually get made in that particular factory. Anything else about the historic performance that Jayson put out?
Corrales asked him what got into you tonight. That was basically the question. Tatum, well, let me backtrack. Jalen had a cute answer. I'm excited to actually see the transcript, but it was something like, you got to get out of that man's way when Jayson Tatum's cooking. And then he gave kind of a canned, we're all better and the system works, blah, blah, blah. And then he goes, I think everyone's got to buy a pair of JT1s because there's something special going on. So that was cute from Jalen. Jayson was asked about it, and he kind of went back to, I was not playing well before. I wasn't playing to my level. He later said, I was kind of in my own head. I was really worried about how do I get this done for my team, and letting go of that, as Tatum explained, is what really helped him stay loose. Missoula, again, there's a theme here for anyone paying attention. Missoula said Tatum got into a groove by playing defense and rebounding, which is probably true, but it's
true.
A hilarious.
Joe Missoula and I once again on the same page. Just want to throw that out there.
Okay, but Jayson Tatum didn't score a NBA record 51 points in a game 7 because he was rebounding well. I mean, there's a little more to that secret sauce.
But that's the thing, because as we have been saying, in wins and losses, they are a very emotional team. When things don't go right for them, things do go right for them, and if the thing you're trying to make go right for you is defense, well, then if that's what makes your offense go, then do it.
No, that's what Jalen told me as such, that the ceiling of this team is defense, and that, I mean, the frame of the question was they had 13 points in the fourth quarter. The Sixers did last game. They had 10 points in the third quarter this game. And when the Celtics played at that defensive level, I mean, we saw it last year. The only teams beating them is beating themselves. I mean, we might as well have like a button on our soundboard to just, because we keep saying it so much, but it's so damn true. I mean, the Sixers are a really good team, and to have them score, I think they scored like 30 points in the second half in a closeout game is remarkable. Let me double check. This is not good podcasting, but
you're close enough to be right.
No. James Harden scored 0 points across 32 minutes in games 5, 6, and 7. So okay, Philly choked like a dog, to put it bluntly, but
don't be so rude to dogs.
Yeah, was that like a big thing back in the day that adage got created? The dogs it's like choking left and right. No, I don't know. I wasn't at Sixers media post game, but Harden and Doc Rivers both suggested that they will be back in Philadelphia next year, and I got to tell you, I don't think either of them or Tobias Harris will be.
Yeah.
How about Ben Simmons posting on Instagram a picture of him watching the game?
Yeah, I love it. Okay,
Sorry, just one more Sixers media thing. Joel Embiid, interesting quote. I can't win alone. Me and James, we just can't win alone. That's why basketball is played 5-on-5. Well, Joel, you certainly can't, but you also can't win when you shot at the percentage that you did.
There's points. The Scrubs points are on the board. Yeah, how about that? Justin Champagnie outscored James Harden in the fourth quarter tonight. My guy, across the past 3 games, mind you. No, Joel was good, not great. He was really cooking in the second quarter. I mean, the Celtics were kind of just giving him that was the formula was, and they went away from it. The Sixers did, which was dumb, but they really worked to pull Horford and Rob, basically using a Harden and Embiid 2-man game or strictly pick and roll to bring
Maxey
in.
Was not so involved in this game either. Weirdly.
Well, so again, they use this pick and roll. They bring Horford and Rob up, and I'm gesturing at the court because I'm sitting next to the court. And then it's incumbent on the rest of the Sixers because they got so many open looks. PJ Tucker was 3 of 6 from the corner, but everyone else on the Sixers was cold. I think they shot like 22% from three. So the system worked. I mean, Embiid's comments are a little out of pocket because it's throwing his teammates under the bus, but they did it. They had a game plan and they didn't execute it. The role players being they.
Was it a failure?
Yeah. Man, this camera angle is unflattering. Don't watch this on
It's just
YouTube.
because you were born ugly. It's not their fault.
Yeah.
For what it's worth, Embiid went 2 for 10 with Al Horford as his primary defender in this game.
So let's talk about the implications for Boston. We already talked about the matchup for the East Finals a bit, but I'd like to get your perspective on what you expect to hear or see from the Celtics in the next round, which is not going to happen while he is currently frozen. So.
There we go. You already got my perspective.
Well, while we wait for that to happen, there's not too much left to talk about. So maybe what we should do is just wrap for the evening. I don't know if Cam's ever going to join us again, but if he does, he can tell us what he thinks of the Miami Heat series. Anything that we missed, Alex, that we haven't already talked about?
Let's see. Anything that we missed? We've talked a lot about kind of what the future looks like for the Sixers, but I still think there's a couple of things. Oh, there goes Cam. Yeah, there's a couple of things that I'm going to be watching. I think, obviously Harden and Doc are the big questions, but as Cam alluded to, what is going to happen with Tobias Harris, I think, is an interesting story for this team as well. He's on a big contract. He did not have he had an up and down series, I guess I should say. And, if Joel Embiid is out here saying that, he and James Harden need help, the logical guy who's kind of the odd man out there, and at least in that starting rotation, you would think would have to be Tobias Harris. I think that PJ Tucker and Tyrese Maxey largely did what they were supposed to do in this series, and I would be very surprised if they were not on the Sixers next year. So what happens with Tobias Harris? And then if Harden is out, is Tyrese Maxey ready to take over as the lead ball handler in that attack? He showed a lot of promise this series. In general, I think Maxey had a really strong, contribution to this Sixers playoff run. And, I think Sixers fans should be pretty optimistic about his future. Is he ready for potentially taking over that offense as the primary ball handler and initiator? That's going to be the next step in his development.
I think they need to force the issue, to be frank. Before we close the door on this Game 7 series, give us some thoughts, Cam, now that you're back with us, about what you expect to see in the next round.
What I expect to see from the next round, the unexpected is I guess the correct macro term, insofar as we're dealing with a 8-seeded Miami Heat team that blew the barn doors off the presumptive best team in the East and just waxed the Knicks. I don't know. I was talking with people today, similar to the past 2 series, Boston has so much more talent, should be heavily favored. But A, they get in their own way a lot. And then B, I don't know what they're feeding Max Strus and Caleb Martin and whatnot, but just because they are undrafted and don't have, the flashy credentials, the Sixers team is pretty deep and pretty solid. I think the Sixers don't really let you make mistakes. You can make mistakes against, the Heat. Sorry, thank you, Alex. You can make mistakes against the Sixers. You can make mistakes against the Hawks, and maybe it'll cost you a game or something, but it won't cost you a series. I think the threshold for lollygagging is pretty low here. And let's remember that Boston 4 years ago in the Eastern Conference Finals couldn't get it done against the Heat. And then last year in the Eastern Conference Finals against the Heat, they came within a Jimmy Butler 3 from not advancing. So Boston ought to be heavily favored, but my levels of respect for the Heat and the Heat way remain mega high. I think prior to the season, I would have said the Heat culture thing is kind of overblown, but I'm ready to believe.
Well, I think it's a good place to put a cork in it.
What,
We'll be back.
me saying the Heat are unbelievable?
Yeah, no, I mean, like, do we really want to say like how great the Celtics are going to be so they go out and lose game one? I mean,
Here's
like,
what-
not that we're going to do it, but I mean, like, that's just not the vibe we want to put out there.
Well, is anyone picking the Heat?
No.
Here's where we want to leave off. What we want to leave off with is this. The Boston Celtics are in for a real challenge against the Miami Heat. They have got a tough matchup, and Miami is going to bring it in ways they haven't yet encountered this postseason. But as long as Jayson Tatum continues to be the guy that he was tonight, the Celtics' chances for banner 18 are very, very high.
This episode of the Celtics Lab podcast is brought to you by FanDuel, the exclusive wagering partner of the CLNS Media Network and BetterHelp. You deserve to be happy, and I think most of us, except for 76ers fans, are. Adios.
CLNS Media's Celtics coverage is brought to you by FanDuel. New customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win.